Matt Rempe is joining Fight Club. The young Ranger enforcer is training with none other than former NHL heavyweight Georges Laraque. We talk about why he might benefit from the training and also discuss his role with the Rangers this upcoming season.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1110 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So some news dropping a little bit earlier this week that Matt Rempe is training with none other than Georges Laraque in Edmonton at the Silent Ice Arena. Basically, he's training to become a better fighter, a more deadly fighter, perhaps even a better defensive fighter, just better fighting in general, with one of the absolute best to ever do it, widely respected and widely recognized is Georges Laraque for being one of the top NHL enforcers of all time. But for anybody that might not be familiar with Laraque and who he is and what his game was, he is now 47 years old, but he had a 12-year NHL career with the Oilers, the Coyotes, the Penguins, and the Canadiens. And there's been some video that's been released this week of Laraque out there with Matt Rempe, a couple of pictures posted on social media, at least one by Laraque himself. And he's training Matt Rempe to once again become, a better fighter, a more effective fighter for however long his NHL career may end up going. But as for Laraque, made his NHL debut in 1997-1998. His last NHL game was in 2009-2010. 153 points in 695 games for Laraque, but obviously certainly best known for his fighting and his willingness to fight. And also stood at 6'3" at 253 pounds. Rempe's slightly taller, also slightly lighter. He is 6'7", 241 pounds. The bottom line, Georges Laraque is somebody that you simply did not want to mess with. He won a lot more fights than he lost. HockeyFights.com, and this I think is kind of an unofficial number, but HockeyFights.com had Laraque at 159 career NHL fights between the preseason, the regular season, and the postseason. That's the one stat where I tend to include the preseason as well, because a fight is a fight. Doesn't matter what part of the NHL calendar it might be occurring. A fight is a fight, and they obviously do add up. And Laraque, obviously the penalty minutes added up, 1,126 to be exact. And, as is usually the case when it comes to Matt Rempe, you're getting a lot of mixed opinions, mixed stances as far as what he's doing and spending his time in Edmonton training for fighting with Georges Laraque. And some people think it's awesome. There's some other people saying, he's got to be working on other parts of his game. You got people that are concerned about Rempe, and that concern seems to be genuine, that this might not end well for him in the long term. And then you've got people that are trying to look at it as practically as they can and understanding that being out there with Georges Laraque, that could be something that benefits Matt Rempe going forward. Personally, I feel like a lot of this, I don't have like a strong opinion one way or another on this. I do have some thoughts, and I'll get to my personal feelings on this shortly, but I think for the most part, people that are loving this or the people that are hating this, I think it's much ado about nothing. Rempe is in a situation where he's obviously very big, very strong. He's a hard hitter, and he feels like one of his paths to a long and prosperous NHL career is playing that enforcer role. I think that much is pretty obvious by now. And look, if he wants to do this and he wants to make himself an even better fighter, and he feels like he can play that role for the Rangers, going forward and making sure he's out there protecting his teammates, then I think that's certainly a good thing. We also had none other than Stan Fischler weigh in. And let me just say, before I get to his quotes, nothing but respect and admiration for him. He's just had an unbelievable career in the game of hockey. But this is what he had to say about the situation. Rempe, the largest player in the National Hockey League, should not be learning how to fight because we already know that he's two-fisted and scary. And then he also went on to say several NHL experts, not to mention scouts, have pointed out that the Rangers' late-season phenom has a major weak area. He's a cockeyed skater. So I get where he's coming from. I do understand this. And by Rempe's own admission, there's a lot of parts of his game that he needs to work on. But I would throw out the idea kind of as a counterpoint here that training with Laraque, for anybody that thinks that this might not be the way that he should go this offseason or he should spend his time working on other parts of his games, I would counter by saying that training with Georges Laraque, look, he's not just learning how to punch really hard. I'm sure that's part of it. There was a video of him throwing some uppercuts with Laraque. Laraque was kind of holding out, one of those punching gloves, and Rempe was just going to town on that. But the other part of this, I'm sure Georges Laraque, who was in whatever I said it was, 159 fights or however many it ended up being, 159, I'm sure he also, throughout the years, learned how to be a good defensive fighter as well and learned how to protect himself a little bit. And you've got Matt Rempe, who is very young, very raw in just about every aspect of the game, probably including fighting. I mean, he's obviously a good fighter, and his size and strength alone will make him an effective fighter. But if you train with somebody like Georges Laraque, who, again, 159 career fights in the NHL, I'm sure he can show you some more tactical things as well, ways to kind of protect yourself, defend yourself, limit as many, of those devastating punches to the face, to the head, as he possibly can. So I think overall, this very likely is a good thing. Fighting in the NHL, it's not just about how hard you can hit. There's tactics to it as well. And I do feel like training with somebody like Georges Laraque, Matt Rempe will get something out of this. There's no way it won't benefit him at least a little bit. And as far as Laraque is concerned, he seems like he's, taken on this task and is fully willing to do that, with Matt Rempe. This is what he tweeted on Twitter. I'm training Matt Rempe and Tyrell Bauer for hockey fighting this week at Edmonton at the Silent Ice Arena. If you thought Rempe was a problem this year in the NHL, wait till you see him this coming season. And again, he's learning from one of the absolute best, so I think overall that is a good thing. I personally think it's fine for Matt Rempe to work on this area of his game. It is part of hockey. I don't think we should ever go back to the 70s and the 80s where every night was a pure six brawl, and benches clearing brawls back in the day were somewhat common, and you never see that anymore, and that's certainly a good thing. I don't think that every single NHL game needs multiple fights to occur within it, but I do think it is still part of the game. And my only thing is that as long as Rempe is making good on his word at the end of the season to improve other aspects of his game, I think it's fine that he's working on fighting. Look, maybe Laraque can even show him a thing or two while he's got Matt Rempe in his arena there. He can show him a thing or two that doesn't involve fighting. I mentioned a little while ago Laraque's career stats. Again, 153 points in 695 games. That is close to a quarter of a point per game, which obviously is not an enormous amount, but it's not nothing. And when you consider the fact that Laraque averaged only 8 minutes and 20 seconds of ice time per night, that's actually a decent amount of points. And I don't know that he was always like a bottom sixer or a fourth liner through his whole career. I mean, I would have no way of even researching that or looking that up, but I feel like that probably was the case with him, more bottom six than top six for sure. And, to rack up that many points, that's no small feat either. And he's doing that while going out there and getting into fights, not every night, but obviously very commonly. One other question that I do have about this whole situation, though, that I must throw out there. Are the Rangers in on this? Like, do they know? Did Matt Rempe at least check in with them before going to hang out with Georges Laraque and learn how to fight better? Now, for the most part, I feel like NHL players, they're left to their own devices in the offseason as far as how they'd like to train and how they'd like to prepare for the upcoming season. But I would hope that Rempe would have at least checked in with the Rangers and hopefully gotten their blessing before he went off with Georges Laraque and did this fight training here that he's currently doing. One other point that I'll make about Matt Rempe, and it's something that I mentioned not too long ago, and I don't know if this is going to be popular or maybe a little bit unpopular with Ranger fans. I do think for this upcoming season, Rempe should start in the AHL. And that's not to say that I don't think he can be an effective NHL player, that I don't think he will have a role with the Rangers at some point this upcoming season. But at the end of the season that just concluded, you have breakup day and everything, and they're talking to Matt Rempe. He laid out all these goals that he has and all these expectations that he has of himself and all these different roles that he would like to play for the Rangers. Talked about wanting to get more ice time, 8 to 12 minutes per night. Talked about wanting to play in a variety of different situations, wants to get better on his skating, wants to be a better overall defensive forward, wants to eventually be able to go out there and kill penalties for the Rangers. And look, who's to say he can't do that, right? I mean, he's obviously very young, very raw, but if he keeps working at his game, he'll be able to do at least some of those things. And the other thing that I want to throw out there too, as far as my ideas on him playing in the AHL. First of all, that's where he can work on all those things. That's where the competition is not quite as high, and the stakes aren't nearly as high either. And Matt Rempe can work on all those things. And if he starts the season with the Wolfpack, you'll see him getting more time per night. You'll see him maybe on the ice late in games when the Wolfpack have a 1-goal lead, trying to prevent them from tying it, the opponents from tying it. You'll see him out there possibly on the penalty kill. I mean, why not? Give it a shot. Hell, put him out there on the power play. Put him out there on the Wolfpack power play unit. Have him set up shop in front of the goalie, screen, see if he can clean up a couple of loose pucks in the crease there as well. But that's where he can really hone his skill. And by the time the Rangers call him back up for this upcoming season, he'll be a more well-rounded player and just more ready to go. So I think that's the way to start the season with Rempe in the AHL. The other thing to consider here too, Rempe can go to the Wolfpack without having to pass through waivers. And that is not true of somebody like, say, Johnny Brodzinski. Now, you can't let this dictate your entire way of thinking, but again, that is something that should be considered. It's not nothing. And if it comes down to like Rempe or Brodzinski making this team, I think you have to at least consider the fact that Johnny Brodzinski would have to pass through waivers. He's not really somebody that you want to lose, and Matt Rempe would not. So that's at least one extra reason for maybe Matt Rempe starting this upcoming season in the AHL. But we will eventually, take a look at the entire roster and do our opening night, lineup projections and everything. But I'd be all for Matt Rempe getting a little more seasoning, getting a little bit more training in the AHL at the start of the season. And then you call him up when it's needed. Maybe you've got a rivalry game. Maybe you are running into a team with whom you've had some bad blood in the past. Maybe they've got an enforcer over there that needs a dance partner in Matt Rempe. So you can pick and choose your spot to call him back up. But again, I think it would behoove the Rangers and Matt Rempe if he gets a little more seasoning in the AHL this upcoming season. But we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to a possible UFA target for the New York Rangers. It is a veteran defenseman, and we will get to that player. And also going to take another look at another Ranger draft pick for this season. So a lot left to do here on Locked On New York Rangers, and we'll get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out, as always, to the everydayers. You guys are definitely going to want to stick around. We're going to talk a little bit more about some various UFAs that have still not signed with a team that possibly maybe could be a fit for the Rangers. Also going to be talking probably early next week with Hunter and Pat from Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins about Riley Smith. They're going to basically just give us a scouting report, maybe talk about why it didn't work out so great for Smith with Pittsburgh and just their general thoughts on the trade. Also, I've had this idea for a while. I might do an episode, and you guys can feel free to weigh in with your own lineup, but I'm going to put together a Rangers starting lineup, center, 2 wingers, 2 defensemen, and a goalie of just players that previously played on the Rangers that I liked more than most fans did. And everybody's going to have their own opinion there. And I'd love to hear from you guys as well. I think it's kind of an interesting topic, and still filling out my lineup, but we'll make that happen sometime in the off season here. But for right now, let's turn our attention to a UFA that remains on the market. And he actually finished this past season with the New York Rangers. We talked about him very briefly heading into the unrestricted free agency period. And that would be none other than 34-year-old defenseman Chad Ruhwedel. Now, again, I think this is an important disclaimer before I really dive into, why I think this might be a good signing for the Rangers. None of the remaining unrestricted free agents are in any way perfect players. None of them are in any way a perfect fit for the New York Rangers. I don't think signing any one of these players is going to make or break the Rangers season. And in some cases, some of these guys, even the ones that are still remaining as free agents, they might just be too expensive for the New York Rangers. However, I do not think that Chad Ruhwedel is one of them. I think certainly they could afford him. He's obviously not a superstar. Again, not going to make or break the New York Rangers season, but just a solid defenseman and somebody that, to me at least, seems like an ideal number 7 defenseman type. If you look at what Chad Ruhwedel has done through his career, he's played 364 games over 12 seasons with the Sabres, the Penguins, and then, of course, this past season, 5 games with the Rangers. In that time, 13 goals, 36 assists, 49 points, -9, 345 block shots, 614 hits, while averaging 1508 of ice time per night. And as far as what he did with the Rangers this past season, again, 5 games, no points, -2, 1408 ice time per night, 7 block shots, 15 hits. But more importantly than any of those stats, because obviously it's 5 games. I mean, you can only read so much into a sample size of 5 games for somebody that's a depth defenseman. But I feel like he just passed the eye test. Somebody that was just very steady out there, didn't really seem to make a whole lot of mistakes, and overall played physical. And I think, was a nice addition to the Rangers. I know he didn't play in any playoff games, but if any of the Ranger defensemen had to miss a game, I mean, they probably would have gone to Zach Jones first, but it was nice to have Chad Ruhwedel there as well as some insurance. But I mentioned Zach Jones. I should talk about him too, because there's been some discussion recently among Ranger fans, Ranger beat writers, whoever it might be, Ranger podcasters, myself even, with Zach Jones. Is he really the guy? Is he really going to go into this upcoming season as the uncontested number 6 defenseman for this team? And should the Rangers bring in some veteran competition for Zach Jones in training camp? I've said this before a bunch of episodes ago. I'm fine going into this season with Zach Jones as the number 6 defenseman, or at least with him firmly having the inside track to being the number 6 defenseman. I feel like he's paid his dues. That spot is now wide open now that Eric Gustafsson has left in free agency, and it should be firmly Zach Jones's position to lose, especially when you consider that this past season was, I would say, easily the best of his NHL career. He's played sparingly for parts of 4 seasons now with the Rangers, but his 31 games played, that was a new career high for Zach Jones. And again, the question that everybody has is, do you bring in some competition for him? I don't think you really need like a true position battle for the number 6 defenseman, like a 50-50 kind of deal between Jones and some other random free agent. But I do think it would be a good idea for the Rangers to bring in somebody that they see as a number 7 defenseman. And if it doesn't work out with Jones, you can always do an in-season call-up, or you can go out and get somebody on the trade market, however you want to address that. But again, while I am totally comfortable with Zach Jones being the number 6 defenseman, I do think they should be in the market for a number 7. And I think Chad Ruhwedel is ideal for a couple of different reasons. First of all, his NHL experience, 364 games, another 25 playoff games. That's far more than any current Ranger defenseman that is in line to start the season in the AHL, or anybody that might be in the mix for that number 7 defenseman job with the Rangers. You can go through the list here. Victor Mancini, Ben Harper, Casey Fitzgerald, Connor Mackey, Brandon Scanlon, and Matthew Robertson. The next closest to Ruhwedel's 364 games is Ben Harper. He's played in 198 games. On top of that, I feel like Ruhwedel just kind of profiles, and I've touched on this already, but he profiles as a number 7 defenseman. We've got the aforementioned experience factor, the fact that he just doesn't seem to make a lot of mistakes, or at least did not during his brief tenure with the Rangers this past season. There's no offense to his game at all. We know that. He's going to stay at home, but he is physical, and if somebody gets injured, he feels like the kind of defenseman that, to me, could step into the lineup and at least, keep the ship from sinking. He's not going to stand out as a superstar player or anything like that, but somebody that does seem to do the little things right and can at least hold his own as a third pair NHL defenseman. Obviously has done so at times in the past as well. Another reason why I got to keep Ruhwedel in the fold if I'm the Rangers, or at least, give strong consideration to doing that. You acquired this guy in a trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I don't know what's going on with the Rangers and the Penguins, with them making all these trades in recent years. They made a trade during last year's NHL draft, and then the Ruhwedel trade, and now this offseason, obviously the biggest one, the Riley Smith trade. But the Rangers gave up a 4th-round pick to get Chad Ruhwedel. So why not make it count a little bit more? Why not keep him in the fold and kind of reap the benefits of that trade? I'm not going to act like a 4th-round draft pick being traded away is going to doom this Ranger franchise, but it's not nothing either. And you just gave it to one of your biggest rivals, and in exchange, you got a defenseman that played in a grand total of 5 regular season games and no playoff games. So why not at least, make this count a little bit more, get Ruhwedel under contract for 1 year in the 6-figure range, and just go from there. I think he would be an ideal fit, as I mentioned, for the number 7 defenseman role. One other factor that I'll mention before we move on to the final pick of the Rangers draft here in 2024 is I feel like if you bring Chad Ruhwedel back on a one-year deal for 6 figures, you've also got at least a little bit of Jacob Trouba insurance. Now, I'm not going to make it sound like Chad Ruhwedel is on Jacob Trouba's level because he's not. And Trouba struggled a lot in the playoffs and really even throughout the entire season. But I'm also not going to sit here and act like he brings no value to the Rangers or he does no good things for the Rangers. But with the Trouba saga, we still don't know for sure how it's going to play out. I would bet, if I had to, that he will be here on opening night still as the captain for the New York Rangers. But wouldn't it be nice to have a little bit of a safety net in Chad Ruhwedel where if the Rangers still choose to buy out Trouba, if they are able to waive him and get some team to claim him, or they trade him at certain salary retained, whatever it might be. Bottom line, if Jacob Trouba is an ex-Ranger next year, wouldn't it be nice to have somebody with some NHL experience that could at least step in to the lineup and hopefully give you some competent play from the blue line? I think the answer is yes to that. Curious to see what you guys would think about that. But in just a second, we're going to shift gears, switch our attention back to the NHL draft, and more specifically, the final player that the Rangers took in this year's draft. And we will do that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. One more draft pick to discuss as it pertains to the 2024 class of 2024 for the New York Rangers, and that would be left winger Rico Gredig. He was taken in the 6th round at number 191 overall. He's an overager at 19 years old. And again, the final pick of this year's draft for the Rangers. Looks like he also plays some center in addition to left wing. 6'1", 179 pounds, and a lefty shot. And I've talked in the past on here about how once you get into the later rounds of the draft, the 5th round and especially the 6th and 7th round, there's only so much information out there, only so many scouting reports about certain players. And Gredig is definitely an example of that. But I'll go ahead and go through some of his stats here from this past season, 2023, 2024. He played a lot of hockey with a bunch of different teams. He played for Davos, U20 of the U20 Elite League, 17 games, 7 goals, 8 assists for a grand total of 15 points. He also played for HC Davos in the NL, 28 games there, 2 goals, 2 assists, and was a -4. He averaged just 8 minutes and 35 seconds of ice time per game. That apparently is known as a very challenging league, the best in the country, and it seems like Gredig, got to test himself there at least. He also represented Switzerland at the World Juniors, 1 assist in 5 games, also a +2. He's apparently eligible to play for Switzerland one more time, so keep an eye on him if he does do just that. The World Juniors, by the way, will be held December 26th through January 5th. And on the Switzerland U20 International Junior team, 17 games, 2 goals, and 4 assists. And looks like he will also play with Davos U20 and HC Davos for this upcoming season. And as far as scouts, again, it's difficult to find scouting reports, but his team manager had this to say about him. In just 5 months, Rico has worked his way up from the U20 squad to the main squad, and when his ice time increased in recent weeks due to injuries, he seized this opportunity and showed us how far he can still go. He also was ranked at number 123 by NHL's Central Scouting of Europeans, so not somebody that was getting necessarily a lot of buzz, but we do have this scouting report from Dobber Prospects. He plays a strong defensive game with shades of Ryan Hartman, can add power to a 4th line and potentially some offensive punch in a higher role. And then one more scouting report here from Jeff Ray, who is a Switzerland regional scout for Draft in Europe. Rico Gredig is an energetic 6'1" product of Chur and HC Davos, a top 6 U18 center for Switzerland last year. He's rangy, energetic, team-oriented, and light on his skates. He forechecks well, kills penalties, is defensively aware, and shows flashes of skill. And one more fun fact for you guys about Gredig, he was the 3rd of only 4 Switzerland players that were selected in this year's NHL draft, and apparently was also the captain of the Swiss U20 team. So that's pretty much it. I mean, the NHL draft class, defenseman E.J. Emery in the 1st round at number 30. You've got center Raul Bouillard in the 4th round at number 119. Left winger Nathan Aspinall in the 5th round at number 159. And then left winger, again, Rico Gredig in the 6th round at number 191 overall. So figure we could pretty much call it there for today. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is LockedOnNYRangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, at @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, this at @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys, and I will see you very soon next time.